Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. The Ukraine conflict shows no signs of abating. Meanwhile, even as NATO allies are trying to present a united front against Russia, President Putin visited Beijing. He sat down with the Chinese President Xi Jinping at a summit on the day of the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in the Chinese capital. Experts have called this a sign of increasingly close ties between Beijing and Moscow as relations with the West sour for both. We'll discuss all this and more on today's weekly broadcast of the WION-VOA co-production with me, Priyanka Sharma. So let's get started. The 2022 Beijing Olympics have kicked off today, but even before the opening ceremony, the Games face some hurdles. Whether it's the political opposition to China's poor human rights record or challenges due to COVID-19 faced by all the athletes, take a look at this next report from Voice of America for more.
The International Olympic Committee has the honor to announce the host city of the Olympic Winter Games 2022. Beijing.
91 nations participate in the Beijing Olympics with a total of 109 events across 15 sports. In Beijing, Olympic officials have imposed strict protocols to prevent the spread of COVID. Tickets will not be sold to the public. Beijing has announced a closed-loop system where athletes and others involved in the Olympics will work, compete, eat and sleep without coming into contact with the general public. All vaccinated participants can move freely in Games-related areas by a dedicated transport system. Unvaccinated athletes will have to spend 21 days in quarantine ahead of the Games. Domestic and international participants will be tested daily. But COVID-19 is not the only hurdle for the Beijing Olympics. According to the Washington Post, a coalition of international activists has pressed for a boycott of what they are calling the #2022 Genocide Olympics, citing China's treatment of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in China's northern province of Xinjiang.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses.
According to China's state-owned broadcaster, CCTV, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Wang Wenbin criticized the politicization of the Beijing Olympics.
体育和政治无关，奥运会是广大运动员和体育爱好者的盛会。 Despite
the global outcry against Beijing's human rights abuses, neither the apolitical International Olympic Committee nor NBCU, the Olympics' exclusive broadcaster in the U.S., will take a stand against Beijing, says Andrew Zimbalist, professor of economics at Smith College.
They all have massive investments in these games, and they want them to come off well. They need to cooperate with each other.
Zimbalist, who has published several books on the economics of the Olympic Games, points out that China wields great influence on international markets which do not want to ruffle Beijing's feathers.
On the one hand, you have markets like the United States where people want you to be uttering phrases and following policies that are congruent with human values. On the other hand, you've got a country that's violating those values, but it's, you're selling $15 billion of goods to them every year, or you actually have an investment as a partner in some of their activities. And so how do you steer a course in between those two things? It's delicate.
According to Variety.com, NBCU is facing a huge challenge on attracting eyeballs to the event, not only because of China's human rights violations, but also because 6 months after the Summer Olympics in Tokyo, spectators are going through what it calls Olympic Games fatigue.
And also, whenever the games are held on the other side of the world from the United States, it means there's a timing issue, so that when you're watching the competition, generally, you're not watching it live. And that's always disappointing to sports fans. You don't want to find out the result of something that happened 12 hours earlier.
However, Zimbalist says most viewers do not bring a political mindset to the questions of whether they are going to follow the Olympic Games. They do it, he says, for the thrill of the Games, the competition, and the teams they root for. Penelope Poulou, VOA News, Washington.
To discuss this and a lot more, joining us now on this special broadcast is Voice of America's correspondent Chris Casquejo from Washington. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Now, as we know, China is known as being very hostile to journalists and for its surveillance of its own citizens. So what can Olympic athletes and journalists covering them expect while they're in Beijing?
Good morning from Washington, D.C. Priyanka. Both groups will be part of a strictly controlled inside bubble at the Winter Games. For example, the U.S. luge team hired a COVID liaison to keep track of vaccinations, tests, and masks, which are all mandatory. A year ago, Olympic organizers in China held a testing event to show the athletes what they will face when they land in Beijing for the real competition. A team member described getting COVID tested every day by a worker in a hazmat suit. And when the athletes arrive, they will only be able to interact with other COVID-tested Olympians. Meanwhile, journalists are taking extraordinary steps to protect their digital privacy while covering these games. They're using burner phones, computers, and other devices like iPads, but they aren't logging on to their actual accounts while in China. This week, the Foreign Correspondents Club of China warned media freedom is declining at breakneck speed. It cited growing legal threats of legal action and stayed back the attacks against foreign journalists. China last year slammed the Foreign Correspondents Club of China as an illegal organization. But so far, those reporting from the Olympics have reported no problems, even if they have limited mobility within that bubble.
Right, Chris. Now, several U.S. athletes have, of course, family ties to China. So who are some of the Olympians that American viewers might be watching with great interest?
For one, there's mogul skier Kai Owens, who was orphaned shortly after she was born in China, then adopted by American parents when she was just 16 months old. She grew up in Vail, Colorado, an area which is known for its world-class skiing, and not coincidentally, she developed a talent for skiing at a very early age. 17-year-old Owens is now ranked number 9 in the World Cup moguls standing by the International Ski Federation. She's returning to Beijing to compete for Team USA, where she hopes to win a gold medal in freestyle skiing. Contrast Owens' story to that of freestyle skier Eileen Gu. She was born in the U.S. to an American father and Chinese mother, but Gu has decided to compete for China, she said, because of her heritage on her mother's side. But Gu's decision to represent China stirred questions about her citizenship status, as China does not allow dual citizenship. One of Gu's main sponsors, Red Bull energy drink, used to have a message on its website that read, U.S.-born Gu decided to give up her American passport and naturalize as a Chinese citizen in order to compete for China in Beijing. After the Wall Street Journal attempted to confirm Gu's citizenship status in January, Red Bull took down that message from its website. Priyanka?
Right, Chris. Thanks so much for all those inputs. Stay with us on this special broadcast. We'll come back to you for more inputs. Moving on now to the Ukraine conflict, of course. And as we've been telling you, WION World as One is in the midst of all the action. WION's team is in Kiev right now in Ukraine, bringing you all the latest updates. For now, the United States is moving forces into Eastern Europe as Russia continues its buildup of troops near Ukraine. The Pentagon says that American troop movements are in response to requests from all allies concerned about a potential Russian invasion. Voice of America's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has the latest. Take a look.
3,000 U.S. soldiers are now deploying to Romania, Poland, and Germany in response to Russia's continuing buildup of troops along Ukraine's borders. The majority from the 82nd Airborne Division will deploy from Fort Bragg in North Carolina to Poland. About 300 troops from the 18th Airborne Corps, also based in Fort Bragg, will go to Germany. 1,000 soldiers already in Europe will move from Germany to Romania.
I want to be very clear about something. These are not permanent moves. They are moves designed to respond to the current security environment.
More than 8,000 U.S. troops remain on high alert, and Kirby warned additional deployments could come soon.
There could be other movements inside Europe, intra-theater moves that we would speak to. We're not ruling that out. We're also not ruling out the possibility that additional forces from the United States could deploy to Europe.
The U.S. has provided at least a half dozen shipments of military aid to Ukraine since December.
You guys ready to go?
And a small number of U.S. troops are in Ukraine as part of an ongoing training program that began after Russia illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. Kirby told VOA in an interview Tuesday U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will travel to Brussels later this month to meet with NATO defense ministers. Russia reportedly has about 130,000 troops along the borders of Ukraine.
You've been talking about the escalation that Russia has been doing. Have they shown any signs of de-escalating at this point?
No, they have not.
Russia has denied the troop buildup along Ukraine's border is a preparation for invasion and says its troops in Belarus are participating in joint military exercises. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
We still have Voice of America's correspondent Chris Casquejo with us from Washington on this broadcast. Chris, thanks for staying on. Now, the deployment of troops to Europe is not the only military move made by the United States this week. What's making headlines is the raid in Syria that resulted in the death of the leader of the Islamic State terror group. Tell us more about the same.
Priyanka, senior U.S. administration officials say Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qureshi set off a bomb, killing himself and his family while U.S. forces closed in. U.S. leaders said they could not confirm how many civilians were killed in the operation, emphasizing the ICE leader appeared to have chosen to live in the residential building precisely because of the presence of civilians, including families with children. But groups like the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said Thursday that at least 13 people had been killed, including 3 women and 4 children. Speaking Thursday at the White House, U.S. President Joe Biden said the operation to take Qureshi off the battlefield should send a strong message. This operation is testament to America's reach and capability to take out terrorist threats no matter where they tried to hide, Biden said. And he added, "We will come after you and find you."
Right, Chris. Now, turning back to the situation involving Russia and Ukraine, something that the world has its eyes focused on, what can you tell us about how U.S. lawmakers might respond to a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, in a very rare show of unity on Capitol Hill, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers are moving forward with bipartisan sanctions legislation that would severely impact Russian leader Vladimir Putin's economic options. Kremlin experts say those sanctions need to be broad-based and impact key companies in Russia's important energy, defense, and financial sectors. Members of Congress who recently traveled to Ukraine and met with officials say American aid will arm the Ukrainians facing this Russian threat. They also found very strong unity among America's European Union and NATO allies. Priyanka?
Right, Chris Casquejo, thank you so much for all those inputs and thank you for joining us on this special broadcast on WION World is One.